Hi guys, how you doing? Well, we're going to take a look when we talk about ancient Greece, something I intentionally have not been talking about. There's two things actually. One is the Olympics. The Olympics we'll talk about at the end of the year because we tend to have a school Olympics at the end of most years. So we're going to do that again at the end of this school year. But the other thing I didn't talk about were the gods of Greek mythology. And that was kind of intentional, to tell you the truth. I intentionally put the gods at the end of the Greek unit, and then I'll talk about the gods of Roman mythology at the beginning of the Roman unit. And the reason is they're the same gods, pretty much, but with different names. So let's go ahead and just jump into this. This should be a fairly short lesson, but some of this information is in your book. I do want you to know that the Titans were the parents of the Greek gods, who are the gods of Mount Olympus. Okay? Make sure you get that out of your textbook. All right, we're just going to go through and look at each god or goddess. Aphrodite is the goddess of love, desire, and beauty. She is supposed to be the most beautiful goddess. She is the daughter of Zeus and Dione. She is married to Hephaestus, and Cupid is her son. Long story short, Hephaestus is supposed to be a fairly unattractive god. He is the god of volcanism and or volcanoes and steel and iron. And Aphrodite is the goddess of love, desire, beauty, things that are soft. This polar opposite syndrome really comes into play in Greek mythology. We'll talk more about that when we study these gods and goddesses again in the Roman lesson. Right now, I just want to introduce you to these gods and goddesses. Apollo is the god of music, healing, and truth. He is the son of Zeus and Leto, and the brother of Artemis, and he is the archer. Okay, the archer. Ares is the god of war. I do want to spend a little time on him in Greek mythology. He's kind of seen as a not a good god. He is seen as a whiny, sniveling creator of dissension. And when we get to the Romans, he's going to be called Mars. The color red is associated with him. He is the son of Zeus and Hera, and in Greek mythology, he is disliked by his parents. And so he's not a popular god in Greek mythology. Ironically, the Romans are going to elevate him to one of the highest gods. We'll talk about that later, though. Artemis is the goddess of nature, animals, and hunting. She is the daughter of Zeus and Leto and the sister of Apollo. Now, there's a story about this about Athena and her creation. She was not born per se. She came basically out of a headache out of Zeus's skull. So, in a very strange way, you could argue that Zeus is both the father and the mother of Athena, but not in the raising her way. But she is the daughter of Zeus. She is the goddess of the city of Athens, of handicrafts and agriculture. Athena was born in her full armor. You can also argue she has no mother. Demeter is the goddess of fertility, corn, grain, and harvest. She's the daughter of Cronus and Rhea. Dionysus is the god of the vine who invented wine. I always like saying that. The god of the vine who invented wine. Anyway, he's a fun god, but he's, for lack of a better way of saying it, I would say a bipolar god. Because, man, he's a jovial guy, but when you get on his bad side, whoo, he goes in a rage very quickly. And he is the son of Zeus and Semele. And you notice that Zeus has a lot of relationships. And Zeus is also married, which we'll talk about later. And that's one of the things about Greek mythology is Greek gods were not perfect. They were they were they were able to have fits of rage. They made mistakes. They were sorry. They they were petty. They were very human like with god powers. Another example of this is Hades. He's the god of the underworld. Um, Hades is similar to our concept of hell, or the underworld, but Hades is not necessarily seen as evil. Now, he's not necessarily seen as good either, but he's not seen as evil like we would see the devil per se. He is the brother of Zeus and Poseidon, and he was one of the three that helped overthrow their father Kronos, which was one of the titans who had swallowed all the gods. We'll talk about that when we study Roman mythology. And Hades and his brothers drew lots for shares of the world, and he had the worst draw. He got the underworld. Now, Hephaestus is the smith and the armor god. He's usually associated with volcanoes. I'm going to go ahead and tell you his Roman name was Vulcan. We get the name volcanism from him. And also, if you study Star Trek, if you ever watch Star Trek, planet Vulcan is where Spock is from. Keep that in mind. We'll talk about that later on when we study the Romans. He has a bad leg because Hera threw him from Mount Olympus because he was born ugly. And he is the son of Zeus and Hera and the husband of Aphrodite. And by the way, I apologize for the misspelling. I will fix that next year when I redo this video. But right now, just it should be Threw. But he was thrown from Mount Olympus because he was born ugly. And ironically, he's married to the most beautiful goddess. But she's not exactly loyal to him. Talk about loyalty. Zeus's wife is Hera. Now, she is the goddess of marriage, and she is loyal to Zeus, but Zeus is not loyal to her. And she is also the sister of Zeus. Now, in Greek mythology, this is not necessarily as bad as it would be here on Earth because most of the gods and goddesses are related in some way. Hermes is the messenger with winged sandals. He's the god of thieves. And he's the son of Maya and Zeus. There's old Zeus again. Hestia is the goddess of the hearth or the fireplace in the home. The hearth is usually the fireplace that the home was built around. And since it's warm, it's usually associated with family and love and warmth, family reunions, the warmth that goes with that. The Greeks would give Hestia credit for that. She is the sister of Zeus. She does not marry. And each polis had a public hearth for Hestia as well. Again, a hearth is a place where the fireplace would be. Sometimes it would be more like a torch. And Hestia is an important goddess of the Olympics. And again, we'll talk about the Olympics at the end of the year. Cronus was the king of the Titans until he was overthrown by his sons. The Titans were the first generation of gods and goddesses. They had Zeus and all his brothers and sisters. Cronus was afraid that his brothers and sisters would overthrow him. We'll go into that whole story at another time. But he was the god that was overthrown by Zeus and his brothers. And then they became the gods of Mount Olympus. Persephone is the daughter of Zeus and Demeter, and she was abducted by Hades, who was lonely, and became queen of the underworld. And there's a whole story with Persephone and Demeter and why the seasons happen. If you were in Greek mythology right now in February, we would be towards the end of the time that Persephone has to spend in Hades with Hades. We're in the underworld with Hades, excuse me. And she is the queen of the underworld, but she does not totally love him. In fact, she loves her mother more. And when she's home with her mother is happy again, and that's the beginning of spring. Poseidon is the lord of the sea. If you ever watch the Percy Jackson movies or read the Percy Jackson books, Poseidon is an important god in those books. Percy Jackson would be called a demigod. A demigod is half human, half god. And Poseidon helped overthrow his father Cronus with Zeus and Hades. He was also the first to tame horses. And so often he's shown with a trident in his hand that can control the seas, riding on a horse. And seahorses are particularly sacred for Poseidon. Now, Zeus is the head god in Greek mythology. He is the lord of the sky and rain and rules over all the gods. He is married to Hera, but he is known to have many indiscretions. Again, the gods were not always moral. In our Judeo-Christian background, most of you are from a Judeo-Christian Islamic background of some kind. God is holy. The Greek gods weren't holy. They were gods, but they weren't always holy. And Zeus is a perfect example of that. He had a lot of wisdom, but he also had his faults. He is also known to throw lightning bolts. Now, in Greek mythology, you would have oracles. Oracles went out and they would have information about the future of life on Earth. Often the oracles were virgin priests or priestesses who acted as communicator between man and God. Sometimes they were not. We'll get into that later. But they would interpret things like the motion of the objects in the spring or the objects in the sky, the movement of birds, the rustles of leaves, interpreted dreams. All these were valid indicators for understanding messages from the gods. And again, we'll talk more about them when we get into Roman mythology. The purpose of today is basically just to introduce you to these characters. But oracles were not gods, they were prophets or prophetesses on earth. The most famous one was the oracle at Delphi, or Delphi, and you'll hear both pronunciations. The ancient Greeks considered sacrifice as the appropriate method to worship the gods. Now, they would sacrifice oxen, sheep, horse, swine, dogs, fish, fowl, etc. to the temples of the gods. But after their sacrifice, instead of the animal being wasted, the Greeks would then feast upon the animal that was sacrificed. The people offered the blood, bones, and hides of the slaughtered animal to the god. It would be burned up, and the remaining portions were used for food for themselves. And this was considered appropriate. Okay, a little different than what you would see with the Hebrew sacrifices, which we looked at earlier this year. Greek prayers were done in the same way. Greeks did not pray individually. They prayed through a priest or priestess, and they prayed communally. Where, again, in our culture, sometimes we pray communally, but sometimes we pray individually as well. The Greek temples were small buildings most of the time until you get to the classic age of Athens. And they contained a statue of a god the temple was created for. Most of these temples did not have a full time clergy or priest in it. Usually, if there was a priest in it, it was almost like a volunteer. It was their side gig. They didn't get paid for it, they didn't accept money for it. It was something they did to honor the gods. All right, now normally I would have a class and we would answer these questions together. Instead, I'm going to ask these questions the next time I see you to see if you paid attention. Who was the king of all the Greek gods? That should be Zeus. Who was the god of the sea? That would be Poseidon. Who was the god of the underworld? That would be Hades. Which goddess sprang from Zeus's head wearing her armor? That was Athena, and she was the patron goddess of the city of Athens. And then I'm going to ask you to name one god or goddess and what they were the god or goddess of when I see you in class. All right, I will see you in class in a couple days. Uh, be safe out there. The roads are really, really bad, and I do worry about you guys. All right, have a wonderful day.